This is the Lutheran Education Podcast, a bi weekly podcast where we explore issues, trends, and events surrounding Christian education with your hosts, Richard Schumacher, Senior Director of Operations at LSEM, and Dr. Tracy Salgado, Director of Special Education at LSEM.
Welcome to the Lutheran Education Podcast, brought to you by Lutheran Special Education Ministries. I am your host for this episode. My name is Richard Schumacher. I am the Senior Director of Operations for LSEM, and I am pleased to say, hey, it's an all LSEM podcast today because joining me today is our Director of Programs and Services, Mindy English. Mindy, how you doing?
Good. How are you?
Real good, real good. Happy to have you on. Thanks for your willingness to hop on and join in today. So, a few shows back, we introduced you again, the new to the role here, still working through your first year with it. How's the year going so far?
It is going very well. It's been very educational and enlightening. I've really enjoyed it. It's very different and a whole new challenge. So I'm loving it.
And so I teased Mindy a little bit. I've noticed this with a lot of folks as they transition out of a classroom into an administrative schedule or retirement or any other role, how they spend most of their days kind of looking at the clock and saying to themselves, if I were at school right now, I would be teaching reading. If I were at
Mhm.
school right now, we would be just getting ready to go to lunch. All those different things. And
Yes.
so you've had a chance to kind of go and transition through all of that. And I've had a chance to work with a lot of schools and a lot of teachers, our teachers, generally classroom teachers, whatnot. So today, as we brought you onto the podcast, I first reached out to you and said, what would you like to speak on? What topic would you like to present on us today? And you chose,
Hands-on or multisensory learning.
which is an excellent choice. Now, again, in full disclosure for those of you who don't know Mindy or didn't hear the podcast when we introduced her a few times back, you spent most of your education career when you weren't teaching in a resource room in the early childhood ages, correct?
Yes, my major was actually early childhood ed with an emphasis on special ed. So I started out in a preschool, a special ed preschool, actually an inclusionary preschool where we brought in special ed kids like from the very severe to just speech difficulties with a gen ed classroom, and we built those together. We were two different companies that had to work together. That was down in Indianapolis, and building that all together. So I've had many years in that. I've even done developmental therapy through the ARC, where I worked with 0 to 3 children within their homes and until in the First Steps program. And then I taught kindergarten. So it's kind of always been a love of mine. Yeah.
And obviously, working with students of that age, multisensory learning is critically important. For anybody out there who is just holding on to something that's just crazy, what would you say, I mean, to somebody who would even begin to think that this isn't a critical piece to learning at the early childhood age?
I think it scares me at times because our standards have changed so much. Like when we look at kindergarten, by the fourth week of school, our kids are already reading CVC words,
Mm.
consonant, vowel, consonant words like cat, bat, those kind of things. By that third week, we are starting that. And we're starting to read those different words. And, by the end, they're supposed to be able to write a full-on sentence, and so getting parents to understand too, just coming in with knowing the alphabet isn't quite enough anymore for kindergarten. And to go through this, the kids need to be a little bit older to sit through all these different lessons that we have to do. But then it's our job as educators to make it fun, to make it hands-on, to make it multisensory, so that they can still learn through play. At that age, that is the best way for them to learn is through all those different senses and playing. So, um, how do you take those lessons that you're given and make them hands-on and playful and incorporate those together so that they can learn it better and still be able to get their wiggles and things out.
Sure.
Yeah.
So I'm going to come back to this one. I'll give you a second to think about it too, because you mentioned the importance of parents and the role that they have, and just knowing your alphabet isn't enough. So I'm going to start this question toward the teacher, but I want to hear your thoughts too in terms of what parents can be doing in this regard as well. But we'll start with the teacher side to give you a minute. Um, what are some of those things, knowing that the requirements are increased now over what they used to be, but also wanting to have the play and the multisensory learning available? What are some of the resources? What are some of the approaches that teachers uh, are using, should be using to maximize that? And then we'll follow up after that with, and what are some of those things that the parents could also be doing?
Yeah, we started working like at my school, we really started working with the preschool teachers too, because it's because of our standards and this change in our standards. It's also not enough that the kid just knows this stuff because we have to sit longer. We have to do so many more things, that they have to sit longer, they have to be able to write more, they have to be able to follow directions more. It's an all day thing now. There is no nap time in kindergarten or rest time. So, even that little 4-year-old that may know all the things, we'll test them, we'll do our screening for kindergarten and be like, yeah, they were, but man, it took us an hour to get through it. They knew everything, but we had to redirect, and a kid who's ready is can be done in 20 minutes. We have to look at that too. Like, yeah, he could probably do it, but he's going to be miserable in kindergarten. Whereas, give him more time to just have more of that play and a little less structure. But we started working with our preschools teachers on really having them focus on the phonemic awareness portion of reading, hearing those sounds, rhyming, finding the first sound, finding that last sound, finding that middle sound, recognizing the letters, putting the sounds with the letters, doing it more in a playful format, but really building those phonemic awareness skills that you need to then move into phonics. And then same kind of with math, really understanding those number skills, that number sense, more, less, greater than, bigger, smaller, all those vocabulary, really playing with that and getting them to understand that in that one-to-one correspondence. We were really working on programs and finding programs that help do that while still playing. So it wasn't super intense. And, our teachers ended up getting Orton Gillingham trained to work on that. And that's something, parents can start working on. That phonemic awareness you can do while they're taking a bath. Do that when you're in the car because, they're stuck. They can't get away. So those are good times to really work on those things. And the great thing about phonemic awareness is you don't have to know simple words. You can still bring out those big words. There's McDonald's. How many syllables are in McDonald's? You see the sign there? What's the first sound you hear in McDonald's? And oh, what color is that sign? Oh, it's red. Well, what's the first sound of that? How many sounds do you hear? Can you think of rhyming? Whatever you're kind of playing with, you can just use the environment around you to play with that.
We're talking with Mindy English,
Mhm.
Director of Programs and Services for LSEM, about hands-on multisensory learning. Now, what you just said and how you went through all of that is great, and I understand and appreciate that from an educator who's highly trained, been
Mhm.
very, skilled and successful over a period of time in doing this. But if I'm a dad, first
Mhm.
kid, first time through this process, where do I pick up these tips? Where do I learn how to even think in these sorts of ways? I mean, I remember back many years when I was first starting out as a dad, even as a middle school educator, I wasn't thinking in terms of how to, really bring out and develop a lot of these phonemic awareness things that you've been
Right.
talking about. So, where can parents go, or what sort of tips should we as teachers be giving to our parents to help guide them as they go through this process?
Yeah, it can be as simple as, when I would talk with parents, or even as like I'm getting old enough now that my friends are having kids that are having kids, have their kids are having kids,
Can't say
So
the G word yet, huh?
yeah, I not yet.
Not yet.
So but they probably are annoyed when I'm around because I'm always like, "Hey, are you like talking about this?" And but it can just be as simple as, when you're talking with them, when you're reading nursery rhymes, I'm always telling them we've lost the art of nursery rhymes. We don't really talk about that anymore, or we just play them on our phone. They can go find the cute little song of it, and I'm like, no, read it to them, and then talk about, what's that rhyming? Have them do that rhyme with you. They'll start memorizing that. Um, you know, Reading, I'm always telling people you have to read. Read with your kids. Read before you go to bed. Read before that nap time. Read with them and just talk about the words. And a lot of times the kids will bring it up. They'll start laughing about, that um silly word in that, and or you'll, oh mom, that sounds the same, or what is that, using that to talk about. It can be as simple as just, hey, you can read that and go, oh, do those two words sound the same? That's called rhyming. Listen to this, it rhymes. And then you can start playing rhyme games. Hey, do you remember when we read that book last night, moo ba la la la, remember that ba and that la rhymed? Can you think of other things that sound like that? um so it can be very natural, and just working on it, and hey, that cow says k at the beginning, and cat says k at the beginning. Can you think of other animals that start with k? So working very simple like that, to the point. Or you can go really into it, and you can look online and you put, give me phonemic awareness word lists, and it will shoot out tons of them and start giving you like, oh, with these words, these are the words that sound the same. These are words you can break apart. Um, say popcorn without pop. It's corn, so you can find lists like that. It doesn't have to be that intense, but once you start it, you'll start hearing it and you'll be like, oh, sometimes it's hard when we would say they're bringing in cupcakes, and I'm always like, cupcake, say cake without cup. I'm always thinking that way, because it just is kind of so ingrained into me. But, you know, you can find those lists to pair, we always gave packets to our parents to work on with that. But again, it's just really start with reading books and talking about the words, because the kids will really get into that too. The sillier, the better often. So,
Now, you mentioned earlier, again, the pressures that a lot of our early childhood teachers have when it comes to doing this because standards have changed over the years and a lot more is being asked in a formal sense from our younger students than they've ever been before. Probably not going to change anytime soon.
no.
And with the increased amounts of federal and state funding that's going into education, the different grants and vouchers and all those different things that are now coming about, legislators love to have ways to measure that their money is being spent properly. And so
Yes.
they're trying to measure something which in many ways is not easily measurable.
Hmm.
So they're shoving a ruler down everyone's throat that doesn't necessarily fit in all situations. So, having said all of that, what sorts of approaches do you feel teachers who are successfully balancing this are taking in order to make sure that the standards are being met so that there's not an uproar on that side of the equation? But also we're still holding true to what we know is best for the students in terms of their learning through being hands-on.
I think a lot of that is, I always kind of think of teaching as there's kind of two philosophies. There's that teacher that gets through every single standard, gets through every single lesson. They can tick off every, yep, I finished my whole book, and somehow they're often done in May, and we're like, we have 3 more weeks. How are you done with the whole book? And did they cover every standard? Absolutely. Did they teach it? Yeah. Did they teach it well? I'm sure they did. They are able to just go, go, go. And they're more like, I'm going to cover a lot at a very surface level. And then the other ones are like, I'm going to take this and I'm going to cover every standard, but it's not going to be through every lesson, and I'm going to go deep. And um, so, a lot of times maybe you didn't get through the whole book or all the lessons, but then you can go and be like, oh, yeah, but I covered that standard in math when we did our science, and I covered it here and here. How did I do that? Because I made it multisensory and hands-on, and I built them together. And it's kind of like that more deep. And I was kind of that more deep person. How many a lot of my math lessons lasted the whole week. Why? Because I covered it so many different ways. Starting out with introducing it with just their little bodies. We use their bodies to find more and less. And how did we do that? And then if we're talking about adding, we would start their bodies coming up and adding, how many girls, how many boys, how many are all together, using them. Then they would have to build with blocks doing it. Then we would maybe make a number line and we had to travel across the number line to see it. And, through that, then we're also doing some worksheets and doing that. But, where my lessons always seem to be like 90 minutes compared to my partner that got it done in 45. But it's because we built so much of that in. But with that, I covered a lot more standards because we did it so many different ways. And, we might play the card game with it, games, just all different things you could bring in to do that. And I think that's where teachers are going to have to really go to keep covering this and not just find worksheets to match that skill.
All right. Now you were very gracious at the beginning of that in saying that there are teachers out there who can cover all of those things, the mile wide, inch deep teaching process. And you were kind enough in that scenario to say, and they probably did cover it effectively or thoroughly, but you chose a different approach to that. Is that because you're wanting to guarantee that you're getting it? Is that because you're looking at everybody from the advanced learner, the one who picks it up really quickly, to the one who struggles and needs more time to repeat it? Why the difference there? Why the choice on your part to go deeper?
I think there's probably 3 reasons. One is probably my special ed background, just
Yeah.
knowing every child learns differently, everyone learns differently. So I need to hit it all different ways. And the more ways I can hit it, the more likely I'm going to find a way that's going to stick for that child. Um, so I think that's usually, and I think my special ed background really helped me with that, to kind of do that and think, nope, we've got to hit this another way. We've got to hit this another way. Um, I think the second reason is probably a more personal one is I enjoy teaching that way more. I'm better at teaching that way when I get to bring in my own creativity and figure out ways to make it different and more advanced. And then once I start, it kind of just keeps going. And I'll be like, oh, now we can try it this way. Oh, we can try it this way. And I'm my best teaching, I am at my best teaching that way. And the third is the kids like it more. They get into it more. They'll request certain activities or, hey, remember when we did it this way? Couldn't we kind of do something like that? So they're bringing that back. And so that engagement, that conversation, and they start coming up with ideas. I don't know how many times, we would be doing something. They're like, oh, Mrs. English, remember we did it like this? And could we do that? And well, how would we? How would we change it to make it work for what we're doing now? And they would come up with that. So then they're teaching, and it just brings that whole thing in which that just makes it so fun. So
Another thought for you, Mindy. I'm currently going through Angela Duckworth's book Grit. About 10 years old now, since that was released. So many of the listeners have probably already, yep, read that, know it, understand all of it. And
Hmm.
one of the things that she talked about in the book, in looking at, talent versus work ethic. And to equate that to students in a kindergarten classroom, for example,
Hmm.
you're going to have kids who are going to be able to retain it quickly because they've just got that memory that's just so quick to grab it,
Hmm.
and they can repeat it, recite it right back to you, and they've got it, on that surface level. Then you've got the kids who truly can retain it and get it that quickly, but in doing so, they never learn the process of having to work, of having to
Hmm.
go deep. And what she's saying in a lot of cases, those children, those people grow up and they become less willing to dig in when it gets a little tough.
Yeah.
They're the gonna quit quick before it moves on. When they're playing their video games, if the game doesn't start off in the first minute exactly the way they want, they're gonna hit the old reset button and start over because we
Hmm.
can't deal with the adversity there. So, in addition to the academics, in addition to the phonemics, in addition to meeting the standards, how does this process also help in terms of creating learners who have that resiliency, that grit to be able to take on something? While this might be real easy, here are the tools to be able to tackle something that might be a little bit more challenging.
Yeah, and I saw that a lot. And we did, my morning always started out with a lot of free centers. Um, and I would have certain ones out, and my kids learn to start exploring. It's always fun from the beginning of the year to the end of the year. But I would always have like one center that would just, I had random stuff out there. Like it might be toilet rolls and a bunch of lids that I collected because I collected everything. And then like these wood chunks, and they would just be on a table, and they'd come in. Well, what do we do with this, Miss English? And be like, I don't know. Just create what you want. And that first Monday, they would just kind of be like, oh no, they kind of avoid it. Maybe a couple kids would go look, and you would see those one kids would try to start something and it would fall and they'd walk away. And so, you'd kind of have to notice that. So the next day I'd be like, hey, I would kind of sit over there, start made me making something, and it would fall. And I'm like, oh, what could I do different? And I would pull that kid in. What could I do differently, do you think, to make this tower that I'm trying to make, or I'm trying to make whatever we were talking about? And so they would kind of start helping. And then, oh, it fell, what could we do different? And so you kind of had to facilitate that. But then we also did a lot of that in groups. So, they would have to build things a lot, and they would have to build together. And, there would be some of those kids where, you were like, oh, got it right away. Awesome for everything else, but it would be so hard for them. One, they wanted to do their own thing. Two, if it didn't turn out, they would just push it aside and you'd be like, it's a whole team. What can you do? We have to change. What can we do differently to make this work? And it took a lot of talking through, but also just that teamwork. I always found like my students by the end of the year really could work together more because I made them work constantly. We did a lot of things in partners. We made them build together. But that trial and error and that constant going, it's okay. Did you try? Did you try your best? We had to talk through that a lot. But I think when you're playing, and even if we're doing greater than and less than, and we're building a tower, and it falls, they could get very frustrated and be like, well, it's not staying up. And so I'd say, well, okay, so let's look at it. Can you still tell from your piles which is greater, which is less than? So we could still, and then it'd be like, oh, well, yeah, I can see it. And getting them to try to see other ways. Okay, now try again. Well, I'm still working with some other kids. Now you try to figure another way to build that to make it stand up. And sometimes they didn't want to, but that just constant, okay, well, then show me a different way you can do it. And so kind of just encouraging that with them. Um, And it took a lot, and some kids still didn't get it, but I always saw progress in that and willingness to try. But I think it's because they had a chance to play instead of just filling out that worksheet.
All right,
And
this
nothing's wrong with worksheets at times. I'm not ever saying that.
oh, so
I use
you're not
worksheets
completely
too.
anti-worksheet?
I used them too.
But before I guess I was going to go to the break, but before we do, then I'll just throw that question out there then. What in your mind is an appropriate time and use for the worksheet, and when do you feel like teachers may be taking it too far with worksheets and missing opportunities?
I worksheets are great, and there's different kinds. There's the cut and paste that make it a little bit more. It's a good way to check, and be able to show parents, yes, look what they can do. Especially like handwriting, at those younger ages, you really do need that to show, and they need that fine motor. I always use worksheets as that last thing. So after we have, and I'm not necessarily saying I'm right, I think I am, but I used it as my last. So after, with math, with writing, even with our handwriting, we did, when we were learning a letter, we did it big armed with our hands, with our big arms. We did it with our little hands. We did it in sand. We did it in, made it with Play-Doh. We made it all different ways. And then we went to the worksheets. You have to have it in handwriting. They have to practice doing that.
Mhm.
Same with math. You need to practice. They're going to be doing math out of on worksheets for the rest of their lives. They have to do that. But we always did it after we did it a variety of ways so that they could see it and also have those tools when they went to the worksheet and weren't sure what to do. Oh, I know I can go grab that group of erasers, or I can go grab the blocks, or I can move whatever Mrs. English has on the table, for me to figure that out. Um, they had those tools to figure it out, but they still then got to practice writing their numbers and how to look at it on a worksheet. And so I always kind of made it my final thing or, built in with it instead of the only thing.
No, I like that. I think that made a little light bulb go off for me because I'm thinking the way you're describing it, the worksheet is just one additional way of doing it in a list of many different ways of doing it.
Hmm.
Fingers in the shaving cream and sand and moving in the manipulatives and all the
Hmm.
different, and then the worksheet's a piece of that.
Yes.
And I'm wondering if those teachers that you referenced earlier who are covering it and have 3 weeks left at the end of May and they're all done, cut out a number of those different methods and just went straight to the worksheet.
Hmm.
Maybe that's why the negative connotation, maybe that's why the more rapid progress through the curriculum, but
Hmm.
losing the depth that you were speaking to earlier. What do you
Yeah.
think?
I think that does, a lot of times it's just, this is what's in our book and this is what's in my teacher thing. And there's nothing wrong with those curriculums are there for a reason.
Yeah.
They're doing it, and teachers, you don't always have time to dive in and look at what else they have, or sometimes, what the curriculum gives you is a little cheesy and you're like, oh, that's not very good. And you look at, well, to make that better, I'm going to have to do this and this and this. And they're coaching and they're being a mom or dad and, all these other things. I am not knocking what they're doing. But there are simple things you can also build in to just make it a little more in-depth, hands-on to reach those different learners, because I think that's a lot what multisensory does. You know, Back when I was first getting started and stuff, differentiation was coming out. And when it first came out, there was kind of this connotation that you have to write a new lesson plan for every single kid in your room that learns differently, and you have to teach it. And that's not really what it is. You can hit it in a variety of ways. Yes, there's going to be that really low kid you're going to have to find something completely different with, or, there's certain things. But a lot of times, if you just hit it in a variety of ways, you're going to differentiate through it because they got it. When you make it hands-on, that little guy that, needs that manipulatives, needs to be able to move that body, needs to do that, is going to get it lot quicker than when you just throw that worksheet at them. And it's not going to hurt anyone else to do that. Even the smartest kid in your class is going to learn from that, and they will automatically take it a step further. You know,
And and just to wrap a bow on that, if you are looking to get the parents to be more involved, more on par with what you're doing there, it's probably a lot easier to convince the parents to do some of these question games that you're suggesting as opposed to creating their own worksheets.
right? Exactly.
All right,
Hmm.
we are going to hit that break now. More with Mindy English, our Director of Programs and Services on Multisensory Learning after the break. You're listening to the Lutheran Education Podcast brought to you by Lutheran Special Education Ministries.
Thank you for listening. If you like what you hear today, please consider sharing our podcast with friends and colleagues in the industry. Again, thank you for listening to the Lutheran Education Podcast.
And welcome back to the Lutheran Education Podcast brought to you by Lutheran Special Education Ministries and continuing our conversation with the Director of Programs and Services from LSEM, Mindy English. Mindy, I was teasing you earlier about that whole out of teaching now and wondering what your schedule would be, where you'd be at that point or whatnot. Uh, Being a kindergarten teacher and being a kindergarten teacher with a very strong proclivity toward hands-on multisensory learning, that tells me that you probably had a classroom filled with a lot of stuff. And
Hmm.
now that you're not in the classroom, you still probably have a lot of stuff. So I'm just wondering, and hopefully if your husband hears this, he can get a grin and a smile out of this question as well. Where's all your stuff?
Well, I did try to leave a lot of the sensory stuff at the school. Uh, it's kind of funny because I wonder like the teacher who replaced me knew because she subbed for me a lot or she came in the afternoons and stuff, so she knew a lot of what I did with those things. Because I did. We collected everything. Tim is just starting to not say, do I have to save this? Do I have to save this? Because we always had bags of toilet rolls and lids and paper towel rolls and socks and cards. I never threw a card away. We just collected everything, and I was often dyeing pasta and rice and made Play-Doh pretty much every weekend. So, I did leave a lot of that there. There was a lot of things I did bring home that I'm waiting for a shelf or a cabinet that I ordered to get put together so that I can go through the stuff and only keep the things I'm trying to use for professional development and get rid or that I want for my grandchildren. And then because I will have some someday, and then try to give them to upcoming teachers that we have either in the family or of friends that are starting to teach and get rid of some things. But it's hard. I put a lot of money and time and effort into that stuff. But I did have a lot, and I will say that the custodians at my school always had a love-hate relationship with me. Um, it was we hate cleaning your room, even though I would try to always clean up. You would just, or we were always clogging the sinks or something. But they would always say, well, I hate coming into your room because there's just stuff everywhere. And there was always things in the process of being made and it's falling on the floor and blah, blah, blah. I would also want, if I had little kids still, I'd want my kid in your classroom. So, it's just, but yeah, there
All
was a
right,
lot.
so Tom Reggie, if you are listening to this podcast at the next LEA convocation, when you're looking for like one of those games that they play on stage during the meals and whatnot, I want you to do a spoof of the TV show Hoarders. And I want you to challenge our Lutheran schools to find the ECE classroom that
Mhm.
would be most appropriate for an episode of Hoarders.
Yeah.
I want to see that out there. I think there would be some great entertainment value for and for recognizing our most prolific procurers of
Yes.
educational materials. How's that for a nice way of
That
saying it?
that would be good because it is still hard. Like when I'm in stores or I see something around, not to be like, that would be
I can do
so
that.
good to do that,
Yeah.
and not get it and think, oh, let me just take this to someone's room, and they would probably go, what am I going to do with this? But
And I'm picturing your husband being like the guy from those progressive commercials trying to teach the people not to be like their parents.
yeah,
He's trying to talk you up. You don't need that. You
you
don't
don't
need
need it.
that.
Yeah, I
All
mean,
right.
yeah, and I couldn't throw anything away because even if I didn't use it that year, I probably could figure it out the next year. So,
Clearly.
mhm.
Absolutely. Now, is there a black market out there for like other teachers? I mean, I'm saying that tongue in cheek, but what I'm really driving at is with these sorts of ideas and these sorts of methods and gathering these different things, are there groups of teachers out there who are connecting and sharing those ideas so that way if say you were looking to try and find one specific way to teach one specific topic and you just were kind of hitting a roadblock, did you have a group of other teachers that you connected with who could say, "Oh, I got you. I saw this and I do that with it, and all you need are a couple of this and that's, and you're on your way." I mean, does that exist? Or even if it
Um,
doesn't, should it?
there are groups out there. I was just on a lesson or a PD yesterday that was talking about multisensory learning, and like my favorite line from there was like, learn from your environment, like learn at the things around you. Like if there's socks, start sorting those socks. Do that, and I was like, that is my person. That's
Mm.
did that. But in your school, you kind of I knew who kind of thought like I did, so those would be the people I would kind of go to, and be like, okay, I'm looking for an activity, or I have this in my mind. What can we do? Our gym and art teachers were really good at that. I always had like little games in my head that I couldn't quite figure it out. And my gym teacher could figure out how for me to make that work. Um, our art teacher, she kind of thought like I did. And she'd be like, oh, well, you could try it this way, or you could do this. So you start finding people who kind of like think like you, and some of the other preschool teachers who, were really into that. They would be like, oh, what did you do? Or what could I do? And we would kind of feed off of each other and how to make that um, or build on, started at the threes and what can we do to make that bigger and more advanced as we went along. So you start finding people like that. But there's also Facebook groups and, just put it in the internet and you can usually find some people. But a lot of times it's just looking at something and you're like, oh.
Yeah, but I guess I'm just thinking more for those folks like you said. I mean, you're listing the art teacher. What a surprise that they would be creative and look at things creatively. The
Hmm.
PE teacher who has to come in and do unique things in small spaces with large groups of kids. So I could see them being creative. You didn't mention any physics teachers, any upper level math teachers, folks that their area of expertise, their curriculum is more rigid, more
Hmm.
precise. So, uh,
Well,
if
science teachers, honestly, at least at our building, our fifth, sixth grade science teacher, I went to him a lot because he really was, and I also borrowed a lot of things from him. He didn't always appreciate they came back with Play-Doh and stuff on them, but I would always have to really clean those before I return them. But he, some of those science teachers, because they got to think through those experiments and what can they do. So uh you can find those teachers, but do I really just have a group I go to? I never did. I think just because I always kind of thought that way, so I didn't really have to look for that. But I bet you if you put in like hands-on learning or play through learning, you would find, different things like that.
speaking of those upper grade teachers, what a shame it is that none of them should or need to use hands-on or multisensory because it's completely ineffective at that level, right?
Wrong. I know everybody thinks it. Everybody thinks it. And when I was K through 8 resource, I did multisensory with my big kids too. yes, you change it a little bit, but not all the time. And sometimes, yeah, they'll go, those kids hate it. They hate it. Yeah, they do in ways, but they like it. You know, when you're that class right after lunch and you're trying to teach literature, and these are kids who struggle to read anyways, and you have to do that, well, you got to make that come alive.
Mhm.
And so we worked on a lot of those. I would make them do my stupid poems with my actions. I would make them, and sometimes I remember one rainy day, and it was just a gloomy, rainy day, and the kids, we were just all like, "Buh." And this is how they approached it because they're middle school. They were like, Miss English, I think we need to do one of those dumb activities you make us do that we move so we can get away. Those stupid things. Oh, which one do you want? Well, my favorite is.
There you go. There you go. It's dumb and stupid, so that way I look cool to the rest of the
Yes.
group, but deep down, yeah.
Mhm. And they can be simple things like, I mean, one simple one, we were working on prefixes, roots, and suffixes. And so I would always make cards of them and their meanings, and they would have to match. And so the first part of it, I just had them in sections, and the first part was, okay, I got the cards up on my like tray. I'm gonna say one, I'm gonna pull out names. You got to find the meaning or read it, whatever it is, and then you go place it around the room. And so then they would tape it up so that got them moving there. And then we would play the game like, okay, now find once they were all placed, then they would, as a group, have to, we called it just, it was a movement break. So I would be like, find the prefix that means before. And then they would have to search the room and all head that way. I've done it in full blown classes too. One time I got called in to sub for our science teacher, actually, who did all these prefixes and everything, and he got pulled away quickly. He didn't have time, and I did with the whole class. They got to do that. Um, and we did it in groups, and the kids loved it. And they were, sixth, seventh, and eighth graders. And it just got them up moving. It reviewed, it did something. The guy didn't have to make a lesson for me right away. I just used what he already had. Um, so it can be as simple as that, but getting them up to move and think, and it just it helps them. And also it wakes them up. It makes it a little more interesting.
Yeah. As a recovering middle school teacher myself, one of the things that I would say from that is, you know, when you're describing, earlier on how your classroom, you're kind of going through all of these different scenarios, and if you're listening to it, it might give that teacher the belief that every moment of every day is this sensory uh, overload, and I just don't have the time, the
Mhm.
creativity, the energy to be able to do all of that. Secondly, uh, classroom management is obviously different at that
Mhm.
level. And so things that you would have the younger kids doing, there are some things there that obviously would not be appropriate or would work well in a middle school classroom. But one of the things that I guess from my perspective on it would be it doesn't have to be where every lesson has three and four different things.
Right.
Even if in the course of a unit that the teacher was doing, one lesson had a
Mhm.
multi-sensory approach to it.
Yeah.
What's the biggest takeaway you're trying to get the kids to have? What's the most difficult concept to wrap your mind around? Having those sorts of things that kind of go along with that seem to make a lot of sense to me in that respect. What are your thoughts on again, just starting slow, seeing
Yeah.
what works, and then if you liked it, maybe adding a second piece to it the following year, and then
Right.
building it up over the course of a career?
Yeah, and especially, with my older kids and even my younger kids, I couldn't make everything hands-on. But just trying to, what can I do? Just like prime factorization. When I first teach that, I do some examples on the board, and then I would have big posters made, and and I'd have it kind of set out, so if it was like 24, that'd be my main number, and I'd have the little Christmas tree things, branches coming out with circles, and then I'd have numbers cut, and then they just had to place them in there. They were still doing it. That took me, maybe 20 minutes to make. Sometimes I would have them make their own, and and then they would have to exchange, and they'd have to have the right numbers, um and then those would be things that they could just pull out, like if they came in, or and I was still working with the group, oh, go pull out the prime factorization, but and review. It can be something you have in your classroom as a gen ed teacher where, okay, you got done with your work, go find those posters, go do that. They can be big. I had big posters. They wouldn't even have to be. You can make small ones with those numbers. And then, of course, then they had to do their real prime factorization, but they were still doing it. And it was still that nice review. When we had to do it's been a while since I've had to teach upper grade math, and I was never, I never understood it, but that was never my forte. Um, so I had to make it hands-on so I could understand it. Um, but like the quadrants, when you had to graph on the four quadrants, we always made a big one. One of those love-hate relationships with my custodians. They finally started ordering me colored tape to be that could go on the floor and come off. But we'd use the tiles on the floor and make a big quadrant. They would make it. And the first step was just where's quadrant one, two, three, four, because that didn't make sense. It didn't go the right way, if I'm remembering correctly. It's
Hmm.
so they would walk that, but they would make that. And then that's how we first learned to graph as they moved across it and, did that. Um, and then they did it on worksheets, but that would stay up through that whole chapter so that when we were reviewing, or if they got stuck, you would see kids just get up and go to the thing and move and be like, oh, that's what we got to do. We only maybe spent 2 days on that one because it took a day to make it, but what a good thing for them to do. And then you have that. And it stayed up usually the rest of the year because that always spins, though it comes back and review and they would go right back to that. Um, so yeah, now did I make some big thing every single time? No, but when it came to measuring or leaders or everything, we would first start out with just a simple lesson of actually measuring water, measuring different things, using real tape, measuring tape things. Um, I got a lot of those to give away too. I still have a bunch of those, but that we'd go around the whole building measuring stuff and how do you find that? And and then we'd do the worksheets. So yeah, now again, that was just a day. That wasn't every day we went out and did that. We one day to introduce it. So you can
Oh,
make.
I'm thinking back to when I was working at Concordia University, Ann Arbor. I was observing student teachers. One of the best lessons that I saw one of my students put forward was in a world history class. So we're talking 10th graders, maybe ninth graders, 10th graders, somewhere in that age group. And he was trying to demonstrate the futility of trench warfare. They're studying World War One.
Mhm.
And so he set up a day where the class participated in trench warfare. And he rearranges all the furniture in the room, and by all the furniture, I mean all of it, to create these two trenches on either side of the room with this giant expanse of all of that was representing all of the barbed wire and the rocks and all the things that they've had in between these different trenches. And he gave each team X number of opportunities over the course of the class to find ways to take the other person's trench. He had it very regulated, very ruled out, so nobody would do anything completely dumb.
Mhm.
And the weapons that they had were balled up pieces of paper, so no
Yep.
injuries or anything crazy like that, no launchers except just, basically their arms to toss them. And it was fun because the high school kids were in just complete disbelief that, oh my goodness, we get to completely wreck this room for a day
Mhm.
and we get to chuck paper at each. And it was all very well done, but it didn't take the kids long to realize this is pointless. This is
Uh-huh.
stupid. This is a terrible way to fight, you know, and all of that. So it was really very well done, very creative. And I think back to most of the teachers that I had for history classes through my own middle school, high school, and colleagues that would have taught them, even myself. This was not something that a lot of those guys would even dare to do.
Hmm.
Just they would look at it and see all of the downsides to it. But those kids really connected well with that lesson, understood the whole premise of it better. And I think it also created a good relationship with the teacher and the student at that level
Hmm.
because the class was interesting. So those kids who hated history, for example, couldn't walk away from that lesson not having recognized, all right, this one was actually pretty interesting
Yeah.
because of the level that he went to make it interactive for them.
Well, yeah, and it does. They remember those things, some of those favorite lessons that I remember when I was younger were those hands-on creative, and you're like, oh, yeah. And the more you do it, your kids start to know, like when we did a lot of different things where they had to walk around the room, and the rules were you have to walk, you can't run unless I say, oh, we're going to skip this time or crawl, depending on the size of the group or the age, and then if you choose to run, you're going to sit for 3 turns. That's it. It's not my these are my rules and I'm in charge and I get to decide. That was always like, I'm the decision maker. If I think you ran, you may think you didn't, but if I think you did, you will be sitting. Um, and I won't take tattling. They start to know that and they start learning it. And they, by the end of the year, I don't even have to go through the rules. They would just start doing that. So when you make those things and you start setting them up, they start to kind of know, okay, I know I'm not going to be able to do this. I know I'm not going to be able to do that. And like for some of our literature books and stuff, we would cook things that were in there that especially because we were doing a whole we were reading a simpler version of someone in a Nazi war camp and in concentration camp, and so they were reading a much harder book in the class, so we took a simpler one but still covering those same things, and we acted a lot of those things out. We cooked, because they would go back to memories of what it was like in Poland and so we researched those. We cooked those things. We made some babka cake. I don't know what I figured out how we made it, but we did, and we did it as a group. And, they remember that. And they'll still talk to me when I remember when we went and we cooked all those things. When you can just find those little things to bring it to life, it means a lot more.
It does, however, take a lot of advanced planning and prior
Mhm.
thought
Yeah.
because you're not going to walk into the classroom that morning and have this uh, ingenious idea and then, all right, we're going to just drop
Hmm.
everything and do this right now.
Yeah.
That probably lends itself toward catastrophe more so than
Yes.
delaying it. And I imagine even if you've already taught, you're teaching this lesson and the idea comes up like toward the tail end of it, now it becomes probably a decision. Do I extend the lesson
Hmm.
longer so I can have the time to create this experience, or do I just stash that one away and then next year that'll be the new approach or the additional approach that I use for it. But
Yeah.
having those advanced thoughts and ideas and then going and bouncing some of those ideas off of others who also
Hmm.
have a similar affinity toward the hands-on to help perfect them sound like a reasonable and perhaps approach you've used in the past.
Yes, definitely. And it is, I will say, especially with when you're doing it for upper grades, you have to plan a little bit more because it's a little more intensive. For little kids, you can also, like, okay, we're just not getting this. Let's pull out the blocks. Let's pull out this, and you can just kind of make it work. For the big kids, yes, for your upper grades, it is a little more intensive. You really have to think of it. What I always like too is the more I did, the more they started to come up with ideas, or they would say, could we try this? And that was also a decision you had to make. I love that they're coming up with this idea, but if we would do that, da da da,
Yeah.
and so
But
sometimes I would have to be, I can't afford it. Or you talk to your parents. If you guys can all bring in the stuff, we'll figure it out. Or, hey, let's save that for the next time. Let's save it for our next lesson and see how we can build something like that in. Sometimes I was like, yes, let's go. But they start coming up with that, and it's that decision making. But yeah,
But
you
isn't
have to
that a
really
huge
see the bigger
advantage
picture.
that the teachers of the middle schoolers and high schoolers would have over you as a kindergarten teacher? Because you're not going to sit down with the kindergartners and say, hey, what? I mean, it would be entertaining, but probably not time well spent. Where the older kids, they're going to be
Mhm.
able to come up with ideas, and if they're taking it seriously, would be able to also recognize themselves. Yeah, my class can't handle this.
Yeah.
We just couldn't
Hmm.
make that one work. There'd be too many problems, but we could do that.
Yeah.
And now you're not having to come up with so many of the ideas. And now
Hmm.
you've got a team of folks who are more actively engaged in the learning process and trying to help create that.
Yeah, and they want to do it. When you start getting them into it and they start realizing it's more fun, they want to start figuring out how can we do that. And I think that's also part of our job, especially for those kids, that struggle or in the resource room or, have accommodation plans or stuff. They have to become that advocate for themselves. And, when you start teaching them different ways to do things, they can start doing that. Like, I remember it was big research paper, big in seventh and eighth grade. And, we got through the seventh grade one. And with the eighth grade one, I remember my little guy, big guy, was like, Miss English, I can't do it. I can't stay after school with you for 3 hours. I can't. And I was like, well, this is what's required. And he's like, I, but I could make a PowerPoint on this. I could do this and make it really good and blah, blah. So I was like, take it to the teacher. And he's like, will you help me? I'm like, absolutely. So we came up with a plan of to why, da, 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 da. And, luckily we had some really great teachers, and she was like, you know what? That will work. I get it. You've already written the paper. I get it. You need to know how to. And she was like, but could you write me 3 paragraphs on it aside with that so we get some writing practice, but then the PowerPoint. But he advocated for himself and he did an awesome job. I mean, he had so many things in it in much more detail than he ever could have gone into writing that paper. So they have to start learning that. So when you start giving them those experiences and different ways to learn, I think it also helps them to start learning how to advocate for themselves in those older ages.
We've been talking with Mindy English, the Director of Programs and Services for Lutheran Special Education Ministries. Mindy, as we wrap up here, if there's anybody out listening who has questions or thoughts or just wants to continue the conversation or is interested in hearing what else you're trying to give away so they can use it in their classroom, what's the best way for folks to get a hold of you and connect?
They can email me at menglish@luthsped.org, or they could even give me a phone call. So, do you want me to give my number on?
Do you have one of the extensions through LSEM's number?
No,
Oh,
it's
we'll have to
just
get
my
that.
cell.
All right, just email for now. We'll get that figured
We'll just
out.
do email. I don't know if I should just throw my cell phone out there.
I wouldn't personally, but no,
But email. Hmm.
we'll get email works, and then we can also on the flyer make sure that we've got a number if we can make sure that you've got an extension through the national office list there.
Yeah.
We can get people connected to you. But Mindy, thank you so very much for taking the time and sharing some of these thoughts and ideas with everybody listening and with all of us. I really definitely appreciate it.
Well, thank you for having me. It was fun.
And thank you for everyone listening. Continued blessings on the remainder of your school year, and look forward to reaching out to you with additional information here as we wrap up the year as well. If you've got ideas for the podcast, folks you might want us to talk to, or topics you might want us to cover, please reach out. You can make comments on the various platforms where you listen, or you can just send an email to any of us at LSEM to be able to offer those thoughts. But until next time, you've been listening to the Lutheran Education Podcast brought to you by Lutheran Special Education Ministries.
Thank you for listening. We'll meet you again in 2 weeks for the Lutheran Education Podcast. For more information about LSEM, go to our website at luthsped.org. You can follow us on X by going to www.x.com/LSEM1873 or on Facebook at facebook.com/LSEM1873. If you're on Instagram, you can find us by going to @LSEM1873. We'll meet you again in 2 weeks for the Lutheran Education Podcast. Did you enjoy today's podcast? Want to help get the word out? Please leave us a review on the app you're using to listen today.